It all started on a warm autumn afternoon in the small, isolated town of Maplewood. The air was crisp, the leaves were just beginning to turn, and siblings Emily and Jack were playing in the woods behind their house. The two were nearly inseparable, despite their differences. Emily, the older of the two at 15, was quiet and introspective, while Jack, just 13, was more outgoing and adventurous. As they made their way through the forest, Emily felt an itch on her arm. At first, she thought nothing of it, assuming it was just a bug bite. But when she rolled up her sleeve to scratch, she noticed something unusual, a small, red spot no bigger than a pencil eraser. It didn't hurt, but it was oddly warm to the touch. "Hey Jack, come look at this," Emily called out, her voice tinged with curiosity. Jack jogged over, his sneakers crunching on the fallen leaves. "What is it?" he asked, leaning in to get a closer look at her arm. Emily showed him the spot, and Jack squinted at it, then shrugged. "Looks like a rash or something. Maybe you brushed against some poison ivy." But Emily knew it wasn't poison ivy. She'd had poison ivy before, and this felt different. The spot was too perfectly round, too red, and too strange. She felt a shiver run down her spine, but she tried to shake it off. It was just a spot, after all. That night, as Emily was getting ready for bed, she noticed that the spot had grown slightly. It was darker now, almost crimson, and it seemed to pulse faintly under her skin. She pressed her finger against it, and for a moment, she could have sworn it moved. A cold wave of unease washed over her, but she quickly dismissed it. She didn't want to worry her parents, especially over something that was probably just a minor skin irritation. So, she went to bed, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread gnawing at the back of her mind. Over the next few days, the strange spot didn't go away. In fact, it began to spread. First, another spot appeared on her wrist, then another on her shoulder. Each one was identical to the first, small, round, and red. They didn't itch, burn, or hurt, but their presence was unsettling. Emily became more withdrawn, keeping her sleeves rolled down even when the weather was warm. She didn't want anyone to see the spots, not even Jack, who had stopped asking about them after she insisted they were nothing. One afternoon, Emily sat at her desk, trying to concentrate on her homework, but her mind kept drifting back to the spots. She rolled up her sleeve and stared at them. There were 7 now, all clustered on her arm like a constellation of blood-red stars. She reached out to touch one, and her breath caught in her throat. The spot twitched under her finger, as if it were alive. Emily yanked her hand back in horror, her heart pounding in her chest. She stared at the spot, her mind racing. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a rash or an allergy. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. She wanted to tell someone, to show her parents or Jack, but fear held her back. What if they didn't believe her? What if they thought she was overreacting? Or worse, what if they did believe her, and it turned out to be something serious, something that couldn't be fixed? That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the spots pulsating on her skin. It was like having a living thing crawling just beneath the surface, trying to escape. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw them in her mind, growing, spreading, consuming her. When she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were filled with visions of her body covered in spots, each one throbbing with a life of its own. In the dream, she looked in the mirror and saw the spots spreading across her face, her eyes, until they consumed her entirely. Emily woke up with a start, drenched in sweat, her heart racing. She jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom, flicking on the light. She ripped off her pajama top and stared at herself in the mirror. The spots were still there, but they hadn't spread any further. For now, the next morning, Emily's mother noticed the dark circles under her daughter's eyes and the way she seemed more withdrawn than usual. When Emily rolled up her sleeves to help with breakfast, her mother saw the spots and gasped. "Emily, what happened to your arm?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Emily looked down at the spots, her heart sinking. There was no hiding them now. I don't know, Mom. They just appeared a few days ago. I thought they would go away, but they haven't." Her mother's face grew pale, and she reached out to touch one of the spots, but Emily pulled away. They're not normal, Mom. They move." Her mother's eyes widened in horror. "We're going to the doctor. Right now." An hour later, they were sitting in Dr. Harper's office. He was an older man, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. But as he examined Emily's arm, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I've never seen anything quite like this," he murmured, turning her arm this way and that under the bright examination light. "They don't look like any rash or skin condition I've ever encountered." "Do you think it's serious?" Emily's mother asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Harper didn't answer right away. Instead, he ordered some blood tests and told them to wait in the lobby. Emily could see the worrying etched on her mother's face as they sat in silence, waiting for the results. When Dr. Harper finally called them back into his office, his expression was grave. "The blood tests didn't show anything abnormal, but that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. I want to refer you to a specialist, someone who might have more experience with unusual cases like this." Emily felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. A specialist. That meant it was serious, more serious than she had ever imagined. As they left the doctor's office, Emily's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. What was happening to her? Why were these spots appearing? And why did they move? And most importantly, what would happen if they continued to spread? That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the spots on her arm. They seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She felt like a ticking time bomb, like something was growing inside her, waiting to explode. Sleep didn't come easily, and when it did, it brought nightmares. In her dreams, the spots were no longer just on her arm, they covered her entire body, moving and shifting under her skin like a swarm of insects. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was trapped in her own body, a prisoner to the strange, living spots that were slowly consuming her. When she woke up, she was drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. She could still feel the spots moving, even though they were just as they had been the night before. But now, they seemed darker, more ominous. Jack noticed the change in her the next day. She was quieter, more distant, and she avoided his gaze. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Emily forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Jack, just tired." But Jack knew his sister too well. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when he got too close. Something was wrong, and it was more than just the spots on her arm. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening to Emily. He had always been able to sense when she was in trouble, even when they were little. It was a bond they shared, a connection that went beyond words. And right now, that connection was screaming at him that Emily was in danger.